إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم الدنيا السجن المؤمن وجنة الكافر أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام أما بعد. As always, as I begin, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you to put away your phones because this is not a time to be on a device. In Surah Al-Mu'minun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this surah with a reminder of what awaits the believers. He says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The believers have prospered. And one of the beautiful things in the Arabic language is that when this word, this particle قَدْ, comes before a past tense verb, this signifies a recency. So it's one thing to say someone was here, and then it's another thing to say someone was just here. So here in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the believers have prospered. But He says it in a way that highlights a level of recency. And then He makes it very clear as to what is the cause of their success. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Those who during their salah have this level of understanding and recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This fear, but more than fear, this true absolute understanding that their ending is with Him. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. Those who are careful to stay away from saying things that are unnecessary, speaking in an irrelevant or useless manner. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Those who perform the obligation that they have for their zakat. And then He says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. Those who guard their chastity. Those who protect their private areas in the literal sense. And when you understand what this means, you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is talking about people being mindful of their relationships, not exceeding the bounds of what He has legislated. And this is why the next verse, إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ, except with their spouses. Now, you hear this verse, and a lot of things make sense in terms of what you've always heard or understood. Of course, I know I'm a good Muslim if I perform my salah and I do it properly. I know I'm a good Muslim if I don't speak in an ill-natured or negative manner. I know that I am a good Muslim if I'm performing my zakat. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something that is so important for us to understand in our time, in our day and age right now. Because, brothers and sisters, we may have allowed the reality of the world to kind of just go over our heads. We may have let ourselves think that the time that we live in is just the same as it was 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. That in those times when you could go inside and let your kids run outside and do whatever they wanted, and they come back just at sunset or whatever time they were given, and then you go on living your life and you have a good time as a happy family. But those days are over. Not in the literal sense, but in the metaphorical sense. Because the days of being able to simply say, my kids are just going to go outside and do whatever they want and it's no big deal. Outside is now the entire world with the internet. Outside means being with and talking to people who are more than twice their age. Outside means being on social media and getting into conversations with people and speaking in a way that is inappropriate. And sometimes you hope appropriate. Being on a video game, talking to someone 1,000 miles away, and speaking in a way that if you were ever to say it in front of you, then you would tell them, if I said that in front of my father, he would have slapped me. Those are the kind of things that are being said in these environments. But what we have done, unfortunately, is that we have made it such that we seem to think we can just let our children live their lives and go on as they did in the past. What I want to talk about today, brothers and sisters, is not that you take your kids and you lock them down. It's not that you lock them in their room or take away their smartphone and tell them they can never do anything fun again. No, instead, I want us to reflect on what we are doing for them to prepare them to deal with those situations. Because the truth is, you cannot hide your son or your daughter from the world. Eventually, they will see it. And if you have not prepared them on how to interact with the world, they will fail at that test. That's the odds. When you don't study for a test, the odds are that you're going to fail. When you don't prepare for something, the odds are you're not going to do well. You tell your kids to get a good education because the odds say that they'll get a good job because of that. To become a doctor because the odds say they'll make money. This is why we do these things. Because the odds would also tell you that there is a percentage, there is a chance that the doctor may lose his license. There is a chance that the lawyer may become disbarred. But you don't focus on that because all you're focusing on is the big picture, the big odds. But I want you to think about what in our world today is available, what is accessible to a young man or a young woman. That if they go onto social media, what they will see are people who are living their lives focused entirely and engrossed fully in the dunya, gambling, drinking, going out and having these illicit relationships. And all they will see is that those people are popular people. Those people are quote-unquote influencers. Those are the people that the world seems to look up to. And if you were to even for a moment see that, you would likely say, no, that's not what we look up to. That's not what we believe. But I want you to ask yourself a question. How often is it that you have real meaningful conversation? If you're on the younger end of the spectrum, ask yourself, how often do you have real meaningful conversations with your parents? Is the conversation usually limited to, how was school? Good. Did you have a good day? Yes. Are you planning to do anything? No. And that's it. I don't know why this is, and perhaps it relates to the reality that the majority of the Muslim community, or at least the Muslim community that we see in our masajid, are coming from an immigrant background, where society played a hand in raising your kids. But in this society, in this country, if you want to live here, that's not going to happen. Unless you're part of the masjid, unless you're fully engrossed and immersed in the community, it's not going to happen. And chances are that your kids will have negative influences around them. They will have people who will take them away from the right path. And if you have not put in the time and the energy and the effort to give them resources to turn to, they will 100% follow the path of least resistance. That is what the odds tell us. There's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ that all of us are familiar with. That Rasulullah ﷺ, he was with a group of people, and a young man came up. Inna fatan shabban atan nabiyya sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. A young man, in this narration, he came up to the Prophet ﷺ. فَقَالَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أُذْنْ لِي بِالزِّنَا. Give me permission to commit zina. Now, I want you to think for a second. How many people, if we were to stand up and everybody was just having a conversation, and a young man came up to the front of this gathering and said, Imam Haris, give me permission to commit zina, how would you react? Well, mother or father would probably be trying to grab that kid, smack him, tell him, no, stay quiet, don't say these types of things. And in fact, in this narration, فَأَقْبَلَ الْقَوْمُ عَلَيْهِ, people turned around and looked at him. وَقَالُوا مَهْ فَزَجَرُوهُ, they said, just, what are you doing? Stay silent. Keep your mouth shut. How dare you say something like that? But it's not what the Prophet ﷺ said. فَقَالَ دُنْهُ, the Prophet ﷺ said, bring him closer to me. فَدَنَا مِنْهُ قَرِيبًا قَالَ فَجَلَسَ. So then this young man came and he sat down with the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ smiling at him, giving him this absolute calm demeanor. أَتُحِبُّهُ لِأُمِّكَ. He said, would you like to hear that about your mother? فَقَالَ لَا. He said, no, I wouldn't like to hear that about my mother. So the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا النَّاسُ يُحِبُّونَ لِأُمَّهَاتِهِمْ. The people would not like to hear that about their own mothers. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, would you like that for your daughter? He said, no, I wouldn't. He said, people wouldn't like that for their own daughters. Would you like that for your sister? No, people wouldn't like that for their own sisters. Would you like that for your aunt? Maternal, then paternal. No, and people wouldn't like that for their own aunts. And I'll tell you something. There is no living person who is not a son or a daughter of somebody else. And so what is the Prophet ﷺ in effect saying? Yes, I understand what you're telling me. I'm not shaming you here. What I'm saying to you is this: listen, you need to understand something. You think that this is okay because it's fulfilling something for yourself, but look at the big picture of society. Nobody would like that for themselves. Why would you want that for anyone else? لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you truly believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. So why would anybody, if nobody likes that, why would people like that? Why would we let that happen in society? Do you now understand the logic here? And the young man did understand. The Prophet ﷺ put his hand on him, وَقَالَ اللَّهُمَّ اغْفِرْ ذَنْبَهُ وَطَهِّرْ قَلْبَهُ وَحَسِّنْ فَرْجَهُ. The Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. He said, oh Allah, forgive him his sins and purify his heart and protect his chastity. And the narration says that young man never came close ever again to doing something like that. So you hear this and you think to yourself, well, yeah, that's the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously. But it's not that obvious. Because the Prophet ﷺ lived in that time and obviously was there for people. What resource do we offer to the young brothers and the young sisters of our community when they have these very same thoughts and feelings? Are we like the Sahaba around the Prophet ﷺ in this moment, turning around, what's wrong with you? Stay silent. Telling them to bottle these up, or are we having actual conversations? Are we discussing these issues in a holistic manner? And my point, as it related to the immigrant background that we have in our communities, is that for some reason, the idea of family dinner has not become a thing. Too often it's, no, I'm working, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. And rather than making time every single day, making a commitment every single evening, we will eat our dinners together. We will sit with one another. We will be a family together as the other people in this society do, so that they can have conversations and relate to their family. Instead of that, there's more focus on what can I gain more in the dunya. How can I have more? And brothers and sisters, you may think that I'm trying to hyperbolize this situation. You might think that I'm making a big deal of something that's really not that big a deal. But you tell me the same thing when you're the one being asked to conduct nikah for a young Muslim man and a non-Muslim girl. repeatedly, over and over and over again. And let me make you understand something very crystal clear. If a young Muslim man wants to marry a non-Muslim girl, they did not just have a text message conversation courtship. If you think that, oh yeah, they're just friends, which may be the story they bring you, oh, they're just friends and they decided they wanted to get married. That's not how non-Muslims operate. That's not how it works. And so if these things are happening, you know what it says? It says that there are young men and young women in our communities, our sons and daughters, going out and committing zina. And the only reason we don't know about it is because we've buried our heads in the sand to think, you know what? I'm sure they're doing okay. Without providing the resources. Because we were never willing to have conversations about marriage. No, you need to finish your doctorate. You need to finish your master's. While every single classmate of your kids, while every single co-worker of your kids has a relationship. And if they don't, they're going out and being illicit. And your kids are supposed to be the ones who spend this time focused on their books. Your kids are supposed to be the ones who, they just can ignore it. Why? How? What percentages, what odds tell you that that's the case? There's nothing. Nothing that says that our young brothers and our young sisters are going to be able to walk away from this temptation. And that's what it is. Because we haven't offered resources. We haven't been, and this is probably more key, we haven't been willing to have conversations about these things. Because instead of thinking about the reality that we live in, that we want to have young men and young women, children, who are sincere, righteous believers, who are not committing a major sin, and we're protecting them from even the possibility of that, why can't we have a conversation? An honest and open conversation to say, what are your thoughts on this? If you ever feel this way, do you think we can talk about this first? And I'm not absolving our young brothers and sisters. They have their own responsibility. If your 12-year-old comes to you and says, I want to get married, I'm not telling you to get them married. But what I am saying is that in a world surrounded by corruption and evil and filth, we need to at least be willing to start these conversations. To be able to make it clear what our expectations are and not make it a moving target. Not say that, you can get married when this happens and that happens and this happens, making it unrealistic. It's not fair. It's not right. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to righteousness and allow us to be people who are mindful of the trials of others. قُلُوا قَوْلِي هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَأَسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. Before I begin, please scoot up, brothers. Fill in every spot in front of you that you see. Scoot up, move forward. Brothers and sisters, understand marriage and dating in the society we live in are not the same thing. And again, I'm not telling you that you need to acquiesce and agree to every single request that your kids bring you. But we do need to understand the stress that they are under. We do need to make sure that we make them understand that we appreciate the work that they put in. That we appreciate that while their friends are going out and doing things that are wrong, that are haram, without any debate or question or difference of opinion, that they are making an effort not to fall into those things. We need to show that level of appreciation. Because to simply think, they're just doing what they're supposed to do, that's not right. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man la yashkuri nas lam yashkurillah." Whoever cannot thank people does not thank Allah. And that applies to your kids as well. There is no random barrier that you cannot show respect to your children, that you cannot honor your own children. This is some cultural fantasy that exists. The Prophet ﷺ, whether a person was younger or older, would be the first to jump and give salams to someone. And there's this cultural idea that, oh no, the younger has to give the salam first. Nonsense. When it comes to the sunnah. And that's what matters. The Prophet ﷺ did not look to put obstacles in people's way. The Prophet ﷺ did not look to make people's lives harder. He said, yassiru wa la tu'assiru. Make things easier, don't make them harder. So what am I saying to you today? First is, when it comes to our kids, whether we're a grandparent, whether we're an aunt or an uncle or a parent, we need to help them know. We need to make sure that they know, I am proud of you for doing these things because I know it's not easy. I appreciate that you're willing to do this, that you're willing to fight these temptations, that you're willing to try and be better in spite of everything around you telling you that you don't have to be. I'm proud of you for that. They need to hear this. For our young brothers and sisters, they need to understand that you have a responsibility to show maturity. Don't make jokes about things that you hope to see. If you want to get married, have honest conversations with your parents. I don't know if it's going to be something I'm ready for, but this is what I think, and maybe this could work. And the money exists. I can tell you countless stories, brothers and sisters, of young men and young women whose parents were doctors, whose parents had money, and they said, you know what, we are going to prioritize our kids' deen and say we are going to support them to help them get married. And to this day, well over a decade later, still married, still living their lives, moving forward. And there's also this unfair element as well, that there's a conversation that happens where it's, don't get married, you can't get married, you won't get married, I won't let you get married, until there's some point, some arbitrary point that comes into play, and then it shifts to, why aren't you married yet? Why haven't you done this yet? Why isn't this going on yet? It's not okay, brothers and sisters. It's not acceptable. And if we are going to live in this society, and this is my second point, we need to understand it's not 1997 anymore. You cannot live your life with your head in the sand. If your kids are online playing games, you need to understand that their chances are good that they're cursing up a storm. And the reason that they're doing it is because you never taught them that that's wrong. And if you made the point, if you would ever say to anyone, if someone asked you, would you sacrifice your life for your kids? And you said yes, then you need to prove it by learning the basic foundational elements of your deen to be able to pass them on. Because if you're not willing to make that little of a sacrifice, how would you ever sacrifice your life? How would you ever? And lastly, brothers and sisters, particularly our younger brothers and sisters, you need to prove that you're ready for these things. You need to show maturity. You cannot simply act like a kid and then get what you want. You can't eat your cake and have it too. You need to prove your own maturity. You need to show this. You need to initiate these conversations. Parents, we need to listen. We need to make it a point that we are going to actually listen and understand and show respect and love and appreciation to them for the difficulties they go through. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the affairs easy for our young brothers and sisters. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to the right path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be a community of righteous believers who are protected from sin. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروا يغفر لكم واتقوه يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا وقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.